Hello, I'm Janet Harris, President of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. It's a privilege to be among those who are engaged in understanding our world's shifting, complex dynamics. This year, the Foreign Policy Association's Great Decisions briefing book features Africa on the cover with U.S. engagement in Africa as an important chapter. To introduce our speaker and moderator for this evening's program about U.S. engagement in Africa is Dr. Betty Tonsing, who, with council members, has organized this Great Decisions 2026 series. Dr. Tonsing.
Thank you, Janet. And with the wonderful committee I have that includes that with us this evening is Diane Farrell and Sean Sheffield, who was responsible for this evening's program. You know, we work in partnership with the Foreign Policy Association, and they give us our programs that also come with titles. And the title for this one was U.S. Engagement with Africa, and this really needs to be called Africa Rising. Africa is positioned for a transformative future driven by a population boom where 1/4 of the world will be African by 2050, coming from Africa, offering a massive youthful and urbanized workforce. Africa already has the world's youngest population, with approximately 60% of its people under the age of 25, and they're dreaming big. This demographic presents a major opportunity for economic growth and innovation, rapid digitization, a booming consumer market expected to reach 16.1 trillion, and a critical role in the global energy transition with key mineral resources fueling this growth. And we have a wonderful speaker to address it this evening, a fabulous expert. We are delighted to have Katherine Ntiamoah, the Director of Policy Engagement and Strategic Partnerships at Indiana University's Hamilton Lugar School, distinguished U.S. diplomat and IU alumni with nearly 2 decades of experience. Katherine leads the school's mission to connect academic expertise with international decision making. Her career spans assignments in Brunei, Benin, Ghana, Pakistan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where she advised ambassadors and briefed cabinet level officials. Her work focuses on redefining global engagement by prioritizing high-stakes strategic and commercial enterprises. Most recently, she supported Vice President Kamala Harris's historic 23 tour of Africa, managed the strategic narrative for a $500 million MCC Millennium Challenge Corporation infrastructure, and brokered creative economy partnerships between Hollywood and Benin's emerging film sector. That must have been a lot of fun. Maybe you'll tell us a story about that.
Yes, definitely.
Oh, that would be great. She's a first generation Ghanaian American and affiliate faculty member with IU's African Studies program, and serves as deputy spokesperson for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, representing a $3.5 billion project in humanitarian policy. And this program would be moderated by an old board member of ours that we still miss, Donald Cassell. Donald has moderated before, and he does a fabulous job. He is a Sagamore Senior Fellow and Director of the Liberian Initiatives, including Africa Rising for the Institute in the Africa portfolio, where he has spearheaded several projects, including a case study on the Liberian Philanthropy Secretariat, a database listing connections between the state of Indiana and Africa. He's a prolific writer with several publications, including a book he recently published entitled Liberia Country Profile, an Experiment in Statehood. And with that, I would like to have Donald begin our evening.
Thank you very much. I'd written 2 books, one on national development as an aesthetic project, and then the other one was Liberia Country Profile, an Experiment in Statecraft. So yes, should we allow Katherine to begin to introduce herself and talk?
Absolutely. It's a fabulous
Okay.
idea.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be among you all today. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey across Africa through the lens of U.S. engagement, drawing on my experiences on the ground in Kinshasa and the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Benin, in Ghana, as well as my perspectives as a first generation Ghanaian American from Indiana. I won't have any slides, but I'll walk you through a few key areas: demographics, economic growth, governance and infrastructure, cultural diplomacy, and the interagency tools that the United States government used at the time to engage strategically. This roadmap will help frame how I think about what I call strategic equity and partnership. This was the principle that I used in order to guide my concept of working with African nations while I was at the State Department. I want to start out by saying that Africa is not a future story, it's a present force. And let me ground that in a couple of numbers. Africa's population today is roughly 1.4 billion people, and by 2050, it will approach 2.5 billion. That means that 1 in 4 people on Earth will be born on the continent of Africa within a generation. Nigeria alone is projected to exceed 400 million people, making it the third populous country in the world. That matters economically. Africa has the youngest population globally. In many countries, the median age is under the age of 20, and this creates a large expanding labor force in the world over the next 30 years. Urban populations are rapidly growing. Consumer markets are deepening. Digital payment adoption in parts of Africa exceed that of many countries in the West. 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies over the last decade have been African at various points. That's not a humanitarian footnote. That is strategic economic terrain. The question for the United States right now and in the future is not whether or not Africa matters. It clearly does. The question is whether our policies, investments, and partnerships reflect the scale and trajectory. And tonight I want to frame this conversation around strategic equity and partnership. Strategic equity means recognizing that African governments are decision makers with leverage. They negotiate, they compare offers, and weigh partners. Partnerships means building systems that create mutual gain and not dependency. So let me explain what that means in practice. In 2008, I was posted to Kinshasa, Congo. It is roughly the size of all of Western Europe. It's rich in minerals that power global supply chains, including cobalt and for electric vehicles. And at the time, the country was emerging from years of conflict. Institutions were considered fragile and public trust was very thin. US engagement there looked like strengthening governance, courts that functioned, elections that citizens trusted, ministries that executed budgets, and security forces that used civilian authority. These were not procedural, but they were foundational. Strong institutions reduce instability, corruption, conflict. Weak ones will amplify them. That experience shaped how I understand stability. Peace is not just absence of fighting. It means that the systems that are present, they work and function, that youth engagement is considered tantamount to development, and expanding educational partnerships in English as a second language was something that I did across the country. Fast forward to my time in Benin. I served as the public affairs officer and U.S. embassy spokesperson speaking on behalf of the U.S. government. Benin is a coastal West African country of about 13 million people. It's strategically located between Nigeria and Togo, with major ports serving landlocked neighbors. It is south of the Sahel, where unfortunately there's violent extremist groups that have destabilized countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But the geography matters because Benin is at the precipice of becoming a global economic powerhouse. But it also has economic opportunity and security risks that are surrounding it. During my tenure, one of the most significant US investments was through the Millennial Challenge Corporation. If you don't know, the MCC is an independent US government agency that was founded in 2024, and it provides large-scale grants to countries that meet governance and accountability benchmarks. In Benin, it has had a number of MCC compacts. That's what they call the grants, because it really is a relationship. The first one, or the one that I was there for, was the MCC Power Compact, which totaled about $500 million. And to give perspective, Benin's annual national budget is only several billion. So $500 million is a really transformational grant. And at that time, we were focused on energy. because in order to have a partnership, an economic partnership between the United States and Benin, you need reliable electricity, and that's foundational. Hospitals function, small businesses are able to thrive, manufacturers can scale, digital infrastructure works, and investors gain confidence. So the MCC Compact strengthened the national electricity utility, but it also encouraged private sector participation and required regulatory reform, which addressed both hardware and governance at the same time. And much of the work that I did in Benin, it drew on the work of coordinating the messaging and explaining U.S. foreign policy through a variety of agencies. So USAID, where we were doing long-term development and education, health, agriculture, and governance. The Department of State, where I was working, which sets the diplomatic priorities and coordinated across the embassies. The Peace Corps, building people-to-people ties through long-term community engagement, one of our most powerful diplomatic tools, and the Department of Defense or the Department of War, supporting regional security and cooperative agreements that align with U.S. strategy. Together, these entities operationalize something that Congress passed called the U.S. Strategy to Prevent Conflict and Promote Stability. It was mandated through Congress through something called the Global Fragility Act. This strategy emphasized that preventing conflict is cheaper and more effective than responding to crises that emerge. So it uses a mix of governance, security, and economic infrastructure to stabilize vulnerable regions. So I'm going to go back to demographics. Africa's population growth is inevitable. By 2035, the continent will have the largest working age population globally. Cities like Lagos, Nigeria, for example, are among the largest in the world. Consumer spending there is projected to reach trillions of dollars in the next decade. If you align education with labor markets, maintain infrastructure, growth is inevitable to follow. But if you fail, instability rises. And that is why infrastructure, governance, and human capital are virtually inseparable. Then there's the creative economy. The United States has found new avenues for influence and engagement. For example, when I was in Benin, one of the most powerful and transformational films about Benin culture that was produced by Hollywood was a film called The Woman King. It premiered and it dramatized the Agoji, the all-female warriors of the Kingdom of Dahomey, which is now called the present-day Benin. While I was there, to capitalize on the popularity of that film, I invited the director of the film to initiate a cultural diplomacy program, which used the film as a vehicle to convene women around security institutions, government ministers, students, creatives, civil society, universities, around the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, which is a UN priority that was established about 25 years ago. For context, it was adopted in 2000. It recognized that women are essential to peace building, conflict prevention, and post-conflict recovery. It calls for women's participation in decision-making, their protection in conflict zones, and the integration of gender perspectives into security efforts. Over the 25 years that this mandate has been in existence, implementation has faced structural barriers, but the initiatives like the Woman King program that I initiated shows that cultural diplomacy can be a tool to operationalize and humanize these types of UN large concepts. The program, as a result, it elevated the voice of women in armed forces and police and judiciary. It catalyzed policy commitments, including a national film commission and studio development in Benin using U.S. Best practices. We engaged over 200 students in workshops and screenings, inspiring the next generation of storytellers and leaders. And through this, we demonstrated that diplomacy is not just negotiation in offices. It is about connecting culture, policy, and economic opportunity in ways that advance the concept that I introduced earlier, which is strategic equity and partnership. And then I also want to talk about my brief work as the deputy spokesperson for the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration at the State Department, where I worked for 5 years. PRM manages U.S. support for refugees, displaced populations, and migration management worldwide. The budget at the time was about $3.5 billion annually. Displacement destabilizes regions. Refugee flows affects borders, labor market, and political systems. So humanitarian investment is a tool of stability, another aspect of strategic partnership. It's not, I do not consider it charity or aid. At PRM, I worked on a three-person team who led the global efforts from media and public relations for U.S. humanitarian assistance, coordinating with UN bodies, the International Organization for Migration, the Red Cross, facilitating over 200 plus media inquiries per year and producing digital assets to increase awareness of U.S. aid, resulting in 25% greater media coverage. I directed communication strategies for U.S. foreign assistance programs, producing videos, graphics, digital campaigns, coordinating things like humanitarian aid conferences, and garnering humanitarian pledges and humanitarian assistance all over the globe. And then lastly, I just want to talk about my work with Vice President Kamala Harris in 2023. She visited Ghana, and during that, it was part of a three-country tour. When she stopped in Ghana, she gave a historic speech at Cape Coast Castle, a site that symbolizes the brutal history of the transatlantic slave trade. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were held in the castle before being forced onto ships and bound for America. In her remarks, she condemned the atrocities, honored the resilience of survivors, and underscored the importance of remembering the history fully while connecting the history to ongoing struggles for equality, human rights, and democracy. This speech was significant not only as a moral statement, but as a diplomatic signal to the U.S. commitment of partnership grounded in respect, dignity, and shared values. I had the privilege of serving as the advance team for the visit, overseeing the African media engagements to ensure that the story was conveyed accurately and meaningfully. This meant that coordinating with Ghanaian journalists, arranging interviews, and managing messaging so that the themes with the historical acknowledgement, resilience, and U.S. African partnership were clearly communicated in the stories that were written by the journalists. By aligning the local and international media narratives, we were able to maximize the partnership of the impact of the visit and reinforce the broader objectives of the term I call strategic equity and partnership, ensuring that diplomatic messaging reached the right audiences and resonated authentically. And then I'll just talk to you, just introduce shortly what I do currently at Indiana University. I lead the policy and engagement and strategic partnerships. That means I design programs connecting students to real-world policy challenges, manage grants, and convene leaders across government, industry, and academia. This work builds on the generation, on helping the next generation and empowering them to be globally competitive practitioners of U.S. and international foreign policy, linking local insights with international decision making. So across Benin, Congo, Washington, and now Indiana, my through line is really integration. It's about thinking about diplomacy, development, security, culture, economic policy, and communication, and how they reinforce each other. Africa and its rise is inevitable. Its trajectory is economic and political terms. They are shaped by the policy choices that they have and the partnerships that they want in the future. So if we want the United States to have a meaningful approach to African partners, we need to approach it with seriousness, with respect, and ensuring that partnership means aligning long-term commitments with shared interests. Africa is not peripheral for the 21st century. It is central to it. And that's my remarks.
Thank you so much, Katherine.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. And now we will go into some questions. I must say I feel compelled to bring in some questions that we talked about before this meeting. And the reason why I feel compelled is that the briefing dealing U.S. engagement brings it up. But I would like to ask, when we talked, you seem to be a bit concerned that there could be a comparison between U.S. and China and looking at Africa like that. And I was wondering why did you have those concerns?
I when I think about bilateral relationships with the United States and African nations, I try not to think about it in terms of competition. The United States and China treat their diplomatic relations and their economic relations with different countries very differently. China invests heavily in infrastructure, railroads, buildings, which are highly visible and oftentimes appeal um, to African leaders' desire for immediate, quick development. And the United States, I think, is while its approach to its relationship with African countries is evolving, it oftentimes thinks about long term, sometimes intangible partnerships, ones that take longer to develop. Economic relationships takes a long time to develop. For example, AGOA, the African Growth Initiative that the U.S. uses to engage countries economically. Those are really long term projects and programs, and so I think that there's an oftentimes it's easy to compare the two approaches to diplomatic engagement, but they're quite different.
And yet, to push this just a little bit more, we do have other questions, by the way. And
Hmm.
yet, like I said, the briefing mentions it. It's almost as though you couldn't talk about U.S. I've written a paper on it, U.S. and China. You couldn't talk about Africa as it is currently constituted with its international relations and its dealing with great powers without necessarily dealing with China. It's just
Hmm.
I'm thinking that from a strategy standpoint, strategically, that is a necessary discussion. Do you think not?
No, I think it's definitely necessary. I mean, China treats Africa as integral to its global ambitions. I think its engagement strategy is quite long and detailed, and so I mean it's impossible to think about China's approach as something that's peripheral. It's really is when it thinks about, I think it's African countries, and I think when I was on the ground in many of these African countries, you could see um, China's influence in very tangible ways. You could see it in the highways. You could see it in the airports. You could see it in very tangible, everyday parts of life. And so, um, unlike the U.S., which has historically treated Africa as a subset of other interests, China, I think, really is considering Africa as integral to its global ambitions. And as a result, I find, at least when I was in the U.S. government, there was it started to the U.S. started to see it the same as well. But it's um, it's definitely I think as the U.S. as the current administration starts to think about the way that it wants to engage with African countries, it may be more transactional, but the engagement will still be there. I think it'll just take a different flavor. And so as we see Trump engaging with more African leaders, we'll start to see exactly what is the strategy for U.S. engagement and how does it compare to what China is doing currently.
Yes. So going back to what you mentioned about the U.S. long-term interest, that is to say, it's dealing differently with Africa than China. Indeed, it is. But you tend to see it as a long-term interest. The U.S. has a long-term interest. You suggesting that how am I to understand that U.S. has a long-term interest and China is all these big splashy projects? How should I understand that? Is that the U.S. interest is 100 years from now and China is a quick fix?
No, I don't think that. I think that right now, at least for when I was in on the continent working, they were more tangible examples of China's engagement. Both countries were looking at engagement at a long term, long term. But when you were looking for US engagement, it was often intangible. So it was oftentimes strategy. It was oftentimes projects that, like the MCC compacts, that were long term, and that the physical the physical um, the physical like manifestations of what our engagement looked like took a lot longer to actually pop up. So like when we were putting together the $500 million compact with the government of Benin, the approach to the projects were a lot more methodical. There was a lot more thinking about how would this benefit long term the Beninese government and its electrical needs. And for China's engagement, I often saw it in the roads that were put up immediately. There were signs that were crediting the Chinese government and what they had developed. And they were oftentimes put up a lot faster and a lot quicker. So that's the difference. I don't think that that they're both not long-term engagements. They just manifest themselves in different ways.
I looking at this because we study it a bit. China does in fact engage in quite a bit of education, also lots of educational exchanges with
Hmm.
Africa. So it's I guess what I'm wondering is that again we talk about this a little bit, so I'll bring it up here again. Is that it seemed to me that I'm happy the U.S. has this attention on Africa, but I almost get the impression that uh, Africa for China, for better or for worse, it's not a love relationship, but the way they view it is that somehow Africa is an integral part to its global strategy, whereas the U.S. I'm thinking that the U.S. still struggles with that. Africa comes closest to maybe a charitable interest, and I think some of the changes that have come about have been merely sort of like you don't quite understand why China is taking this region so seriously because you can't see it like that. But you know strategically you need to be there because you don't want your competitor to be someplace that you are not. Would
I
that
think,
would
yeah.
that go ahead, go ahead. Would that be an understanding, or is that I'm being a bit too hard,
I don't
whatnot?
think you're being a bit too hard. I mean, I think that the U.S. has been engaging with Africa on a number of facets that I think are not always visible to American citizens every day. And so, for example, I mentioned the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It's a U.S. trade preference program that was enacted in 2000, and it was recently extended to December 31st of 2026. It provides duty-free access to the U.S. market for over almost 2,000 products that are eligible um, from sub-Saharan Africa. And it gives a standard generalized system of preferences benefits to many African countries. And this act promotes economic growth, diversifying of exports, and it encourages market reforms. That type of engagement is not charitable. It is ensuring that African countries have access to U.S. markets and vice versa. I think that what's seen very often, I think what is a historical perspective of U.S. engagement has been through humanitarian assistance. But the U.S. government also had, at least when I was there, it had lots of exchange programs and opportunities for African educational exchange. For example, there was an initiative called the Young African Leaders Initiative, which
Yeah,
was
I know.
launched
The
under Obama.
Sagamore, we did a whole lot with that. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
there was a lot of engagement in Indiana and across the United States for African leaders who are today some of the most influential leaders in their country. For example, in Benin, the Minister of Digital Transformation was a what we call Yali
Yes,
recipient, and so
yes.
there's been plenty of examples of African leaders coming to the United States us having a cultural and educational and academic exchange with African leaders from all across the United States, and then them bringing back the best practices and us learning best practices in return. So I think that while the aid and the humanitarian assistance is splashy, it's historical, it's the thing that most people think about, there are lots of ways that African leaders and African citizens engage with Americans every day in very unique and sometimes intangible ways.
Yes, okay. That's good. We'll leave that part of US-China. We may come back, but we'll leave that alone for a
Okay.
moment here. Looking at everybody is speaking of this demographics, and indeed that can be a very powerful thing. Uh, there's been some concerns amongst some thinkers that you have to have policies in place to um, to take advantage of the uh, demographics dividend. And there are concerns that those policies are not in place. The same thing with cities. I think The Economist wrote a piece on it, The Economist magazine wrote a piece
Hmm.
on it, and then they wrote a piece also on cities, how cities have traditionally, from what we've seen in Asia and Europe and the United States, have been a place of tremendous job creation and all that. But in Africa, what you get is unfortunately just slums developing. People go there to suffer more. I think read something about an African scholar was writing on agriculture, and he was trying to actually convince people. Jacob, it's not Jacob, Celestus Zuma, he's now deceased. It was very good work. And he was trying to get people to do a whole lot with agriculture and stay within the rural area because the city, in spite of its flashing lights, may not have a whole lot for you. So what do you think about that kind of more skeptical concerns about what will happen with the growth in democracy like that, the demographic growth?
Mm.
Yes.
I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the whole continent, but I do know that, Africa, as many people have said, is experiencing a massive youth population boom, and it really is up to each individual country to be able to recognize that this is potential, this is growth, this is economic. This means that there are people who are going to be ready and willing to contribute to a growing workforce, and that is a massive energetic workforce. But in order for that workforce to be harnessed, there really does need to be positive policy shifts that take into consideration digital adoption, ensuring that the energy grid is sufficient and able to sustain engagement. That there are initiatives for women and youth engagement, and that there is a rising need for investments in technology and green sectors, and ensuring that food production is adequate enough for these growing populations. That city planning are things that are taken into consideration.
That's good. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in order for, I think, for places in Africa, there'll be a growing population of people who are going to be highly savvy and technical and technology and connected to technology. And as AI, as all of these different technologies continue to grow, they'll need to be able to have and to control rapid urbanization so that it makes sense and it's sustainable. And
The the
then, mhm.
the question that we are having is that yes, all those things that you've said is true, but the struggle we are having on the ground is whether the current leadership is as impressed with that, impressed
Mhm.
with the demographics, impressed with how they respond. If you look at Asia, China, for instance, but Singapore is a good example, or South Korea, the leadership in taking advantage of the demographic dividend, they were aware of it, and it seemed to worry them, and they were doing a whole lot of things to absorb that into the
Mhm.
economy. uh, for me, looking at the continent and being experienced with Liberia, I just am not sure whether that is a pressing need amongst the leadership?
I mean, I did work in Singapore, and so while I don't think that you can compare an Afro one, I mean, like I said, I didn't have to know exactly which country you're comparing it to, but Singapore's economic growth, it has from the 1960s. It was a very slowly developing nation, and it used a number of economic factors in order to be what it is today. I mean, they had a very intense labor movement that right around their independence, where they were looking at and focusing on industrialization and turning areas that were completely um, just open, just jungle and open green area into manufacturing hubs to combat high unemployment. And then in the 1970s and the 1980s, they worked on shifting to from high value added labor to focusing on electronics and precision engineering and shifting to the economic markets. And then present day, they're now looking at transitioning again and focusing on making it sure that it's a hub in Southeast Asia for financial services, for technology. And it really has solidified itself as a global financial center. So I think as the leadership has thought about its development in every single decade, and really thinking about its people, and the way that they're able to adjust to these shifts has made Singapore what it is today. That's the kind of leadership that could benefit many African countries, and it could be used as a model. But the what's I don't think you can compare any one African country to Singapore, but it can be used as a model for many countries of that size, and those types of historical phases of growth that can be tracked and used as a best practice for as many African countries.
Yes, I know the country that comes to mind is Rwanda, and they have used the Singaporean model, and we can argue about the model, but the thing that I'm always impressed with is that it seems though the model clearly delivers. If you follow it, you will get these things out of it,
Hmm.
and that's one of the advantages. My only concern is that I'm not sure, other than Rwanda and maybe a few other states, whether that kind of robust thinking to take advantage of this demographic dividends is actually there. I don't get the impression that they seem pressed by it, and we have so much to do and we must get it done. I don't get that impression.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The other thing that I want to ask you, and this is maybe a political question, but it need not be a political question. The USAID, one of the board members here, I mentioned that it's a tragedy and all of that. Whereas my experience in Liberia and in Africa, there have been some Liberians and some African thinkers that have not thought of it so much as a tragedy. Their concern is that, how should I put it? They felt that that might force African people to be less dependent on what the USAID was doing and force them to try to take care of those things themselves. What do you think about that? You think they're being a bit too hard on themselves, or maybe never fully comprehended the work of USAID, that kind of stuff like that?
Hmm. I mean, it's first of all, I'd like to say that USAID had a tremendous amount of expertise and ability to understand how to think about long-term growth, and I think it positively changed the trajectory of many countries that it operated in. And it's a shame that it was dismantled in the way that it was. Not only because the work has ended, but also because I knew and worked alongside many consummate professionals all over the globe in USAID. And I think that when people think about USAID and the makeup of the type of person that worked at USAID, it wasn't just Americans. There were many local employed staff who were working and supporting USAID projects. Many people that I knew worked and had advanced degrees and specialized in ensuring that things like critical health systems, humanitarian assistance, agricultural development, reducing childhood mortality, reducing the rapid spread of HIV and AIDS. But they also strengthen things like pandemic response, food security, enforcing and strengthening the educational infrastructure of many countries around the globe. They also worked in economic and agricultural growth. There's initiatives that I can think of, for example, Feed the Future.
Yes.
It's had transformed rural Uganda in significant ways. It created and supported trade hubs. It had created a number of jobs on the local economy. But it also was a leader in providing emergency aid. It supported many crises around the world from ever reaching US shores, and kept Americans safe. And there were many times that the work that USAID did, what that was largely preventative for many countries around the world and for the United States. Um, while I think that I think many people at USAID wanted to put USAID out of business. They wanted to ensure that the programs and projects that it was doing were not forever. There were always plans to ensure that USAID was not a crutch, but that it was a partner in many of the initiatives that they did around the world. So health, economic, agricultural growth, humanitarian assistance, which was the most visible because it was usually responded to very quickly, and then trade and investment. So there were many projects that I think didn't always translate to American public. It's unfortunate that in the last year and during the demise of USAID that people only then got to see the transformational power of the work that they did around the globe. But USAID didn't tell its story to American citizens. It told its story and the work that it did to congressional leaders, and it also told it to the foreign publics that it was of the work that they were impacting and the work that they were doing around the globe. So if I could ever do and have USAID start over again, I would have a lot more work and emphasis to American citizens who got to see and understand how USAID was making America safer, stronger, more prosperous, and sometimes by doing preventative work that Americans didn't typically, or even foreign publics got to see.
Okay. Thank you very much, Katherine. Now that it's been dismantled, what is U.S. policy now? I mean, all those things that you said were pretty good things.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we go from here? What's the new policy for do you know it? That's one of the things we're trying to figure out here.
I mean, I don't know what the current administration's strategy is for Africa, and I will not speak on behalf of the U.S. government because I don't work there anymore. I do know, though, that when I think about U.S. engagement on the continent of Africa, it definitely has to be rooted in partnership. It has to be rooted in seeing African countries and African leaders as equal. I mean, if the US economy and US companies want to continue to grow and to engage and to have new customers and new markets to expand into, Africa is that place for growth. And so if it's going to be largely transactional, it needs to understand that a transactional relationship requires both partners to be fully engaged and fully respected and seen as actors that are open to engaging and that can do it so that it will benefit both nations. And so it looks like there'll be the current administration is looking to shift away from humanitarian assistance being the crux of our engagement. And because there are U.S. economic interests on the continent, and that can be harnessed through private sector growth, that can be harnessed through ensuring that critical minerals and energy are at the heart of the relationship. There's an opportunity for growing technology, our technology partnership. There's an opportunity to have partnerships and projects that are based off natural gas and nuclear, um, and it
So,
may.
so would you say then that perhaps what has happened is that this humanitarian thing being sort of at the crux of the U.S. policy in the past, like I said, kind of almost charitable, which is not a bad thing, which I want to talk about it, philanthropy and private philanthropy a little bit. But right now, what is happening is that, so to speak, this relationship is becoming more muscular on part with China, which China does not engage in humanitarian type work. Most of its work has to do with trade and investment and those kinds of hard capital. You know, you invest, you get money, you build companies and that kind of stuff like that. Is that where we are going now, you think?
I don't know where we're going because I can't predict what the what the current administration
An educated guess.
is prioritizing. I mean, I think that the current administration has been largely transactional, and when you are largely transactional, relationship building is looking at not the historical relationship, but looking at the future relationship and seeing where there's opportunity for growth. And so, the updated national security strategy, not every single world, it's stated that not every single country is going to get equal attention. And but I do think that there is an opportunity for Africa using for many African countries to utilize where their strengths are, and that is that there is opportunity for this population boom, that there's an opportunity for growth and new economic markets for expansion for U.S. companies. And so when you look at it like that, then there is an opportunity for the Trump administration and the current administration to engage thoughtfully and to see where it's going to benefit American citizens by having these new opportunities for growth all across the continent.
Okay, very good. The other thing you mentioned here, and I guess the equity in partnerships and all that, and I do write on that, but I've become very realistic as to what that in fact looks like. And
Hmm.
what's your thought? What would I mean? Here you are, say, instance Liberia. You are a poor country, you know what, a billion and a half for your national budget or something like that, and you're dealing with a powerful state like the United States. What does equity look like in such a situation?
Hmm. I mean, equity looks like for me, looks like an honest assessment of what your country's strengths are and where there's opportunities for real growth. I don't know exactly the economic situation of Liberia, so I can't speak about how it would approach it. But as me, as someone who has used to looked at where there's points of leverage for diplomatic engagement, I mean, that is looking at where's the opportunity for each individual country for their growth. So is the population going to be one that is highly educated and that is focusing on key sectors where the United States cares deeply? So is there opportunity for growth on critical minerals? Is there an opportunity for growth for expansion into new markets? Is there an opportunity for new places for development of clothing or key products that the United States government is looking to expand and to find more affordable places for key products to be developed and to expand. Are there opportunities um, for science innovation and growth? For example, in Brunei, for example, I was working on a project with three universities in Singapore and the United States, um, and in Brunei, and we were looking at the opportunity for scientific expansion and growth in AI. And it was an opportunity for all three of us to work collaboratively, utilizing scientists and students to understand where there's opportunity and potential for growth. And could we develop new technologies so that it could benefit all three of our economies? So, really, in order for the United States and for African countries to continue to expand upon their economic relationship, it really does take someone doing an honest assessment of where are those opportunities and overlap for each nation to develop and grow, and where are they mutual beneficial for both.
Sometimes I think about, and I still want to, we're getting close to our time here when we have to cut off, but I still think those opportunities, at least the impression I've received while working in Liberia, is that to even do that assessment, oftentimes is the powerful state that is able to do that assessment. And
Mm-hmm.
then almost right there, you still wonder where is the equity in that relationship. The powerful state has come, done the assessment, and said, "I think you need this,"
Mhm.
and you wonder where is then the equity in that relationship.
I mean, there is no equity in any diplomatic relationship. There's always going to be one country that has one up on the other. But there are many African countries that have the one up on the United States. I mean, the United States doesn't have the youth population in many of these African countries is enormous. That means that there are new customers, that there are new markets, that there are new opportunities for development and enhancement in creating new opportunities for American companies that need a growing customer base. And so, if African countries are honest about where there are overlaps and where there are opportunities for growth and where they have leverage, that is the key to having a strong diplomatic relationship. But yes, there are many. It's very hard to go toe to toe with the United States government when it comes to negotiation. But there are many African countries in Benin and Ghana and Congo where they have they have very good negotiators and very good diplomats who are able to represent the needs of their country adequately. It's just it also takes the United States government though sitting down and actually working out these opportunities too. It's not just the African country, figuring out exactly what and who they would like to, where they have leverage. It's a two-way conversation.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Yes. And that can be a struggle. I mean, even when you mention the demographics with the youth, I have a 15 years old niece here, and the quality of her education. I go to Liberia every year and I see other relatives, not different people, other
Mm,
relatives that do not compare with that 15 years old
mm,
who stayed here and grew up. She was born here and she grew up. The advantages that she has as a 15-year-old, I don't see too many people amongst my relatives that equate to that same level of function and understanding. So that's you really wonder about that. The equity, it's a long way, a long shot.
mhm,
The other thing that I was thinking here is that there's been a whole lot, even in the briefing that we had, and they mentioned all kinds of different things, investment, etc. But I don't understand. They didn't mention very much about human capital development. And in the briefing, it's sort of toward the end of the discussion of all the other things that the minerals, wealth, and broad systems and
mhm,
all that kind of stuff in a small sort of a paragraph that human capital development is a thing, and I'm just wondering about that because it seemed to me. I think one time I was involved in an interview. Are you actually in the? What is one of the
mhm.
most important thing that you think will be helpful for Africa? And I mentioned human capital development. It is so strategic. And again, Singapore is a most excellent model. You focus on that, and everything then fits into itself. I don't know where you're getting. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, Why all these different things? And no one seemed to be talking as much about human capital development, the education, the billions of dollars that will need, the training of these people, so you don't have the problems
Hmm.
with youth not being very well educated, etc., so that they can, in fact, participate in robustly with all of the new technologies. What's going on here? Why are we not focusing as much on that? Is it that maybe it's too long to get that done? You're talking about somebody it's going to take many years, and you see the product. What's going on? Can you address that a little bit?
I mean, human capital development, especially on the continent of Africa, especially the place that is so young. I mean, it will take generations. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight in Singapore, and it didn't happen overnight in the United States. And so, there are many initiatives that the United States government was supporting, um, at least while I was working at the U.S. government, that was focused on enhancing health, education, skills to drive economic growth through a plethora of programs that we were offering and initiatives that we were developing hand in hand in tandem with African countries all across the continent. We were working, for example, with USAID, with the Department of Defense, on programs that reduce mortality, that use best practices regarding how to strengthen the educational system. The United States at the time was collaborating very frequently with the African Union on various projects and programs that were utilizing and thinking about ways to foster prosperity and invest in digital transformation and public health, not alone, but also with U.S. private industry, with companies like Google, for example. There were programs that were supported by that were working on digital transformation, on health and nutrition. I mentioned Feed the Future was a very important initiative, and these were not programs that were done to African countries. They were usually and oftentimes developed in tandem with African countries. So um, I think that at least while I was in the U.S. government, that this was something that was very important to ensuring that this youth population, or what we call the youth bulge, um,
Yes.
was adequately supported.
Okay, well, Catherine, thank you so much. I think we have only one more minute here, and I will ask one last question and then we'll open it to the floor. One is that we at the ICWA did some work in terms of philanthropy and all the work that they are doing. And they are doing some very, very meaningful work. I think about some of the schools in Africa, the universities. I mean, if we at the Saigomo, we've seen people establish university of was professional universities with students, smaller than that, sometimes 500, 600 students. And then you have lots of Americans that go from here to there. And sometimes these organizations are Christian organizations, etc. I don't, whenever we deal with these kinds of discussions, they do not bring in too often the work being done by private philanthropy
Mm.
interest. And I wonder sometimes if it would help if they paid more attention to them so that we can craft policies to make, I mean, this is all their private money, their private effort. If we craft policies to make sure that this will have to extend the impact of the work that they're
Mhm.
doing. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I mean, unfortunately, with the demise of some of the largest humanitarian agencies in the United States and around the world starting to give less, it's an opportunity for foundations and private donors and organizations to really step up and to think about ways that they might be able to fill that gap. I know that there are many tech companies that are very interested in ensuring
Very
that
good.
AI, that emerging technologies are making it to the shores of Africa. And so when I think about what are ways that we may that people might reimagine what humanitarian assistance or partnership on the continent looks like, it may be that private industry and that foundations are the ones that fill that gap. And so we've yet to see exactly what that might look like, since it's only been a year since humanitarian assistance in that field and engagement um, has changed tremendously. So I think that there's lots of opportunity to see what it'll look like in the future. This is the time that private industry, that associations, that African countries can and will um, be able to partner more effectively with these countries in order to think about long-term solutions to that human development question that you had asked me earlier,
Yes.
but also across various industries. So that not only is it a benefit to the immediate populations, but thinking about, okay, so the companies that are coming into Africa, what are the skill set that they need that need to be cultivated within African countries? And so that's an opportunity for departments of education and ministries of education to think about how do we want to redirect and think about the next generation and what skills do we want to give these populations for in the future.
Is it only for that kind of industry, or are we hoping that the education contributes to the very idea or reality of statecraft?
Um, let me maybe rephrase the question. I'm not sure what
Well,
exactly.
I'm saying that, I mean, your reference here with just, education in terms of industry and,
Hmm.
how we can meet that, and all those things are very good and very practical. But I'm saying that I wonder whether in that discussion, the very idea of statecraft should be included. Should there be ways to help young African men and women seriously study and ponder almost a philosophical level what it means, what does statecraft actually means?
I mean, I think if I understand your question, um, how are youth going to be engaging in statecraft?
Yes, how do they run the state? I mean,
Okay.
that is one of the crises in Liberia that I seen, and I seen it in other
Hmm.
African states. How do you, this is a tremendous responsibility that you now have, the burden of state. What does that mean? How do you run
Yeah.
this?
I mean, right now they're I mean, Gen Z um, is engaging in statecraft in non-traditional means all around the world. I mean, you've seen in Bangladesh and many places in South Asia where this generation of youth that are coming up, when they are not when their needs are not being met by the state, they are organizing in digital spaces, in person spaces, and demanding that their countries and that their leadership respond to their needs. So I think that many of the Generation Z movements that I've seen over the past year and a half, if there isn't an adequate response by the government in order to craft the state in order to respond to the needs of the current and future generations, that this generation will respond quickly and forcefully. And so I feel like the different movements that I've seen around the world are kind of a warning to many countries that aren't taking heed and not understanding how powerful and how quickly this generation can mobilize, especially when they are in digital spaces. And so I think that many of these countries, it's a warning to many African countries, and it's a warning to to even the United States, that there are ways that this generation will not stand by and just have things happen to them, but that they will be active and mobilize quickly.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. We'll now open the floor. Ray, we'll open the
Okay,
floor to
sure.
questions from the audience.
All right. Thank you very much. And Catherine, thank you so much. That was an enlightening discussion between you and the our moderator here, Donald.
Donald.
Donald, yes. Anyhow, our first question actually is with Betty Tonsing. Actually, Betty.
Yeah. Thank you, Donald, for bringing up USAID. I was actually the one that said it was a tragedy. And
Yes.
I feel pretty strongly about that. One of the missions, USAID had many missions, and among those missions was to create strategic partnerships with recipients of aid becoming sustainable so they could become partners. And Two of our earliest recipients of USAID funding was China and India. And today, both China and India are among the top 10 of our strongest trade partners. So we have to really bear that in mind. USAID had humanitarian assistance, had a whole variety of the partnerships. But one of the missions, if you go and, well, the USAID website is now gone, but it had a very long mission statement. And one of its objectives was to create leading to sustainable ability that eventually these countries could become partners in trade, which is really critical. And one of the concerns, we had a program about this, Catherine, in January. It was a repeat program that we had started off our speaker series with in September, but unfortunately the recording wasn't well. So we did it again in January, and this time the recording took so we could get it up on YouTube. So we can also do an update on it. And you might want to take a look at it. And those of you who are on tonight, listen to that recording. One of the questions asked was, is there another future, maybe not called USAID, but of course, this is an opportunity. Any organization deserves the opportunity, and this is a great one, to assess before we do this again or rebuild, how might we do this differently? The concern is in this void is China's Belt and Road Initiative. This has been ongoing now for quite some time in Latin America, in Africa, and I'm not sure in other parts, perhaps in Asia, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could comment on that because this was, I don't want to call it a competition of aid. They took a different approach, clearly a different approach than USAID. But there is a void. There's going to be a void, even in a change going forward in administrations. We're not just going to, well, the first thing we're going to do is plop down a new building and go back out there. We've lost a lot of institutional memory files so much and letting people, and as you say, most of the people were people in the countries themselves. And that is where the greatest loss of memory takes place. The people who know their country and the needs that need to be met. Can we find those people again? But can you comment on your thoughts on the Belt and Road Initiative?
I mean, as a communications and public affairs specialist, the Belt and Road Initiative was and is a powerful tool for China's engagement around the world. I mean, in many countries that I was posted to, and I worked at 11 embassies around the world, the Belt and Road Initiative was clearly marked. It had a very clear approach to explaining why it was important, what its long-term engagement and goals were in China. And so, as a communications professional, I think they had a very strong approach to explaining what they wanted to do. I mean, it launched in 2013, and so it's had a number of years in order to explain why and how they've invested $1 trillion in global infrastructure projects and development around the globe, even in places as small as Brunei, where I was last posted up as of 7 months ago. And so they were utilizing their relationships to build railways and ports and pipelines and digital infrastructure that would eventually boost China's ability to have more trade partners and influence and reshape global economies. So it was a quite powerful initiative, and it's impacted, I think, almost every single country that I was posted to as a diplomat. I see there's lots of questions that are popping up.
Yes, it's a whole lot.
But to go back to USAID, I mean, there was. I feel like when I was talking to my USAID colleagues, they were trying to work themselves out of a job. I mean, their long-term approach was to strategically partner with countries from around the world, but also with NGO, with private companies, with universities, with governments to advance development around the world. And so there were thousands and thousands of partnerships that were public and private that totaled billions of dollars across the globe. And so these collaborations, they were not just government to government, but they were able to focus on things that were related to health, to economic growth, to humanitarian relief, to economic and agricultural development. And so, but I think that those projects and that type of work that they were doing were often not seen by Americans, and so, or even sometimes foreign publics. And so sometimes I feel like it was a crisis of communication rather than a crisis of effort. A lot of USAID projects were just as impactful and just as strong as the Belt and Road initiatives. It's just that they didn't get the story to the people that needed to hear it most.
And we need to go into other questions, but we raised this question during the panel discussion, and the USAID Foreign Service Officer said, and we won't go any further with this, but we were not allowed to PR ourselves in America, so America could hear that
Yeah,
story.
that's a misconception. I mean, there was in 2012 there was a law that was changed so that we could start telling our story to Americans.
Okay.
But at that time, it was just too slow. It was too slow, and it was too there was not enough um, meat or money put behind that storytelling. And so it did change, and I was active in ensuring that that effort was bolstered. But I was only one person, and that kind of storytelling really needs to come from the top. And so it was a shame that USAID's narrative was taken over by bad actors, and because it really was doing transformational work across the globe.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the question, Betty. Next, Claire Collins, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed this. I was reading in the Journal of Great Decisions about the organizations, the Pan-African organizations, and I forget what they're called now, but and also some countries joining BRICS. But the Africa of 30 or 40 years ago, there were revolutions or civil wars, I mean, in Nigeria and Sudan and Ethiopia and
Liberia.
Rwanda. And yes, but and they seem to be driven by ethnic groups and or religious groups. And but I'm hopeful now that you're mentioned that the younger generation is going to save the situation. And I mean, there used to be these despots that ruled for 50 years and plundered the country of all their wealth. But do you think that the younger generation is going to take a leadership position, or have they taken a leadership position? And are they going to have a true democracy and actually more income equality in the future than even the United States? Can we hope for that?
I mean, I can't speak for every single country that I've been that I worked in, nor for the continent of Africa. But I do know that there were many examples and many times where I was engaging with African leaders that we had hand selected because of their potential and their ability and willingness to collaborate and learn from and partner with the United States in order to share best practices regarding youth engagement and regarding democracy promotion, and having a representative government. And I saw this very often as we were having engagements with the program that I mentioned, the Young African Leaders Initiative. And so leadership and programs like that take decades to develop. For example, the Fulbright program, which is over 50 years old, many of the people that participated in that program when it first started are now heads of state, are now leaders in their economies, they're ministers, are owners and of private companies and industry. And so that type of development and that type of economic resilience and youth participation takes time. And so I think we're just at the beginning of seeing what African youth want out of their nations. But what I did see up close and personal and seeing many of these African leaders over the course of my 20 years of working in public service and working overseas is that African youth want a government that is representative of their needs, of the future, of the kind of country that they want for themselves and for future generations. And so I think we're just starting at the beginning to see what that might look like. But that kind of development, that kind of change takes time.
Okay. Another thing, between the U.S. attack on Venezuela and the attack on Iran, President Trump ordered some bombing in Nigeria to save Christianity there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that he probably did it to win points with a certain group of American Christians. But have you heard of what is the effect of the bombing of Nigeria by the U.S.?
I have not heard of what the impact of that bombing will be like, and I really actually can't even speculate why exactly the Trump administration has decided to take unilateral action in Nigeria in regards to his response to that situation. I do know that is that the type of foreign policy that is most effective is that of which both countries have a vested interest and can decide together what is the best approach for handling violent extremism or any type of violence that's happening in the country. And if it's not done with a long-term approach and is not done as a one-off, then it will not hit the root of the problem. And so the problems will continue because I don't think that there was a coordinated approach across the government and the U.S. interagency, which is what typically happens when there is a response that uses military force. I mean, as a diplomat, as a former diplomat, I always think that it's important in order to use diplomacy as the first tool of approach, or to use all three, which we called. I mean that we used development, the three Ds: development, diplomacy, and defense. They all need to happen in tandem. And so if only one happens, it doesn't get to the root of the issue. And if it's not happening in tandem with a partner government, then it'll never be rectified or adequately dealt with. So I don't think that the approach that the current administration is necessarily useful because it's not utilizing all of the full toolbox of U.S. engagement that typically is effective. And the thing is with U.S. engagement is that if it's successful, you don't hear about it. You don't typically hear about effective engagement because it never gets to the shores. You always diplomacy is always working quietly. It's always working in tandem with the Defense Department, with organizations like USAID when it existed. And so when things are working well, you don't hear about them. You don't hear about the effectiveness of it. So when things go bad, that's typically when they get adequate news coverage. So I always tell people to keep that in mind when they think about engagement and like, why didn't I hear about this? Or why didn't I know about this? Or why did this happen? It's typically because it went well.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Thank you, Claire. John Widener had a question. His mic, I guess, is not working here, but what is the future effect of ongoing insurrections in Central Africa? How will developing economies be affected by this? And I suppose this is actually tied in a little bit to some of these ISIS insurrections and ISIS raids and so forth. We hear about this in the news, and what's going on with that whole conflict between ISIS and some of the local governments.
I mean, I'm not right on exactly which conflict he's talking about, but I did in my opening remarks talk about the violent extremism that was happening in the Sahel.
Yes.
And so when I was in the government, we did have the Global Fragility Act, of which Benin and many countries across the world were a part of, in order to think about a holistic approach to countering violent extremism. And so that meant providing and thinking about economic opportunities for African youth, for those who may be susceptible to violent extremism and joining those types of groups. It was thinking about security needs and training for governments and doing them in tandem with U.S. government forces. It was thinking about the health needs and the economic needs of people who may fall prey to these types of groups. I don't know where the Global Fragility Act currently stands, but at least in Benin, we had a very active program with the Beninese government, and that was across the development, the development space, the defense space, and the diplomacy space. So we were all working in tandem in order to ensure that the violence that was happening in the Sahel didn't come into Benin, and that it didn't spread across West Africa, and it didn't make it to the U.S. shores. So I think that I'm not sure exactly where that work currently stands, but we were working very hard across the government and with our local African colleagues in order to ensure that the programming and that the work and the initiatives that we were doing were not just one-off programs and projects, but those were of which were able to expand and to grow and to think about ways to really think about the root of the violence. And the root cause was typically youth unemployment. It was inadequate health needs being met for young women and young men. It was thinking about education and ways that we can bolster and share best practices on youth educational needs. So it was a variety of things that we were doing as a government in order to partner with our African counterparts in order to combat the extremism that you're seeing today.
All right. Well, thank you. Jane Gilhausen, I believe you're next here for your question.
Yes, thanks, Catherine. I like your comments and your insights tonight. My question is that you've mentioned several countries which are really advancing and growing. And if I were to take a trip to Africa to witness this firsthand, where would you recommend I go? And where would you recommend I prioritize?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I have such a limited experience living in Africa. I feel like I'm just getting a taste of all of it. I've only been to I mean, someone said Nigeria, so if you have a
I
tour
think
guide.
Rwanda is a good place to start.
Yeah, okay. I think, but I mean, if language is no issue, I would definitely recommend Benin. I mean, the amount of economic development and growth that's happened in such a short amount of time has been astounding to me. I hope to go to Benin hopefully in the next year or so, but the growth of the country and the economic priorities of the current administration, to watch it grow has been astounding. Um, the foreign investment that they've been able to attract, the amount of universities that are pivoting toward growing industries has been really fascinating to watch. I'll always say Ghana. Ghana is a as a Ghanaian American, I think Ghana is a great window into Africa. It is
Katherine, I'm sympathetic with you there. Ghana is a good place. Yes.
yeah, it's a great place to. They've had years and years of developing their tourism industry. It's a very welcoming place. There's lots of Ghanaians that live in the United States and have lived in the United States and understand how to connect with Americans. And it's the past president and the current administration has put an emphasis on ensuring that tourism is one of their growing industries. And so I think that Ghana has done a very good job of welcoming foreigners into the country to learn about their culture and to really involve all facets of its economy and ensuring that tourism is at the head of their economic growth.
It's also democratic.
It is democratic.
Okay, I've got three new countries to go see.
All right. Well, thank you. And I saw that Mo actually suggested Nigeria. She put that on your list.
I've never
Okay,
been to
Mo.
Nigeria, but yes.
All right.
I know Mo will do that. Yes.
Actually, I think we have time for one more question. I think Sean Sheffield, you out there? You got a question, Sean? You still with us, Sean? He's got little kids he's dealing with. I think maybe we lost him there.
Good picture.
So I did have one more question before we kind of sign off. What's happening with sort of the health issues in Africa? You know, we know there are serious problems with AIDS and malaria. You know, what's the kind of current status with that, especially since we've cut off some of that aid that we were providing?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the whole continent of all of the health issues. That would be like me trying to characterize everything that's happening in the United States in every single state. I do know that the United States government was a very supportive partner in terms of bolstering and ensuring that and strengthening the health systems of many African countries. And so when I think about U.S. engagement, especially through USAID, there were lots of programs where we had, for example, we were combating the malaria epidemic that was happening across many countries. And so that was providing bed nets, that was providing education about why it was important to sleep under a bed net, that was working with African scientists and American scientists together in tandem to think about ways that malaria could be eradicated. That was one of our strongest areas of partnership in countries like Benin and in Ghana. And PEPFAR, which was a program that was initiated under President Bush, was a program that was looking to eliminate the spread of HIV and AIDS. And that was a pretty powerful tool in our toolbox in order to ensure that AIDS, which was spreading rapidly, in the past, to ensure that that education, that the health systems, that medication were being provided. And that wasn't just a program that just benefited recipients or people who had AIDS. It was also benefiting U.S. governments and the U.S. and U.S. companies. I mean, these were countries that were purchasing. That were purchasing some of these life-saving medications. That was just they were not just receiving them as beneficiaries of aid. So many of these initiatives were not just a benefit to African populations and people. It was also a benefit to these U.S. companies that were developing and creating and sustaining these health benefits to many African countries. So it wasn't just a one-way benefit; it was a two-way benefit for many American people and American companies. Yeah, but I don't know exactly everything that's happening health-wise, since I wasn't a specialist of health when I was working for the U.S. government. But it was definitely a priority area of partnership for many African countries in the United States.
All right. Well, thank you. I think our time is about up here. I'm going to turn it back over to Betty to kind of take us home.
Thank you. But Sean is here. Sean, did you have a quick question for Katherine? We can't hear you. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, did you want to type it in the chat? Okay. Katherine, I did just one. Did I hear you say Women King?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
Lion King?
Yeah, Woman King was that movie with the what was her name? I can't think of her name right now. Viola Davis.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, so I invited the director to come to
Women
Benin,
King?
and we did a whole bunch of cultural diplomacy programs and projects in order to figure out if there was another way that we could engage with the Beninese government. So we utilized film as a way to engage, and so we looked at helping them to use American best practices to develop their film industry. We worked with the Ministry of Defense. We worked with the Ministry of Culture, Art, Youth, in order to think about national initiatives and use U.S. best practices to develop and help them develop their film industry in the way that Benin wanted.
Well, it's just a Women King. I thought,
I should see the movie. It's fantastic.
Women King?
It's
Hear
very
her roar.
Yeah.
I just thought that was great. You mentioned film industry. One of the things I remember that USAID was heavily criticized for was its use of developmental theater and what people called comic books. And what people need to understand is that in rural areas of Africa where they're trying to put forth a health message, the illiteracy rate was very high. And you couldn't just drop off pamphlets what to do to avoid people couldn't read. And so the comic books might be used as a descriptive way to get a message across, and also development theater. Before I left in 93, I saw a great deal of use of developmental theater of groups, people being trained, Africans going throughout the countryside using developmental theater to also convey a message in areas of, particularly in health. So
Yeah,
the
I mean, yeah, that's an effective tool that we even use in the United
very
States. I mean,
effective.
you think about PBS, you think about
Yes. How,
learning
yes.
about bills and
Yes.
the way that our U.S. government works.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
utilize music and song and dance so that you will never forget like what's a bill or what was it the I'm just a bill. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a song that no one will forget. And I mean,
Well,
that's an effective tool of engagement, even in the United States. So
yeah, well, I mean, Sesame Street was first developed
it's Sesame Street, exactly.
for
I mean,
children
that's a
who
tool that
were
is invaluable
in,
across the globe. So
well,
I,
in low income families whose
mhm,
grandmothers didn't quite really, they were staying with their grandma, and they thought, well,
yeah.
the whole idea of Sesame Street, and then it just exploded across the spectrum.
Exactly. I
And
mean,
children,
We use Sesame Street. I was using Sesame Street as a tool of engagement, even in 2022 overseas,
yeah,
and in the United States. So
well,
it's a
yeah.
definite effective tool, and that it's a shame that it was villainized for USAID because if we just look in our own backyards, you'll see that it was an effective tool even for American children.
Well, and I think a lot of us know why it was villainized, which is just wrong because
Hmm.
the whole one of the major focuses of PEPFAR very early on was yes, we need to go in there and provide medicine, but we also need to deal with the stigma that people had for getting AIDS in the first place. People were
Hmm.
not only ostracized because of just being treated like it was a leprosy, but being ostracized for the fact that they even got it. And so it was a lot of things to it. But no, children going into the first grade already knowing how their ABCs and how to read because of Big Bird. And no, it's just, but getting the message across is really important. Thank you. What
Hmm.
an engaging program. And thank you to the audience for your wonderful questions. It was really great. And Donald, thank you for being a fabulous moderator.
My
You.
pleasure.
You're so good at doing this. We really appreciate it. So, Catherine, thank you so much for educating us even more. And now you have several people on here who want to get to Africa. There's 52 countries, and it's tourism is awesome. Nobody asked you about that. How important is tourism to Africa?
Oh, it's everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much more of the continent to explore. As long as you can get there and you have the time to explore the continent, there's so many more places to learn and explore it. And I can't wait now that I'm not tethered by the U.S. government to just go on the continent and see what other things I haven't seen.
How important is it to its GDP?
Oh, I don't know. I don't actually know the exact numbers. Maybe that's
It,
something that our moderator might know better than I
Well,
do.
it is very important. I don't know the exact numbers either. I know Liberians have been working quite a bit to build up their own tourist
sure.
industry because they know
For a
that from
beach.
there they can get a whole lot of income from it. Plus, there's lots of lovely things to actually share and show to people in
Hmm.
the country. Yeah.
Well, you've got a beach, and to South Africa, to
It's
South
yeah,
Africa.
so 350 miles of beach, but also the forest. We have an ancient forest there, Guinean forest, and then within that we do have very nice waterfalls and all that kind of stuff within that forest.
Yeah.
Plus, I think at least around Ivory Coast, we used to have the last group of forest elephants that live there, and we still do have the leopard, the largest cat within that area that lives there also.
Well,
So.
to Southern Africa, tourism is absolutely major. And also the countries to Swaziland, Lesotho, where I lived. And so thank you very much. Thank you to our audience. I
Thank
should
you.
say that next week's program is going to be on Tuesday night, May the 10th. And it's going to be, and I don't have the details, I normally do. Um, it is going to be somebody help me out here. Janet, look at the book real quick. Open up your book and tell
Going
us,
to be a nuclear proliferation.
Mm.
okay. And it's going to be by Dr. Hall from Muncie, from Ball State University, and moderated by
Mhm.
Ken Holland. And Ken also has us on our, we have wonderful people on our board. They're absolutely fabulous. Ken has a formidable background of his own.
Mhm.
He was president of the American University of Afghanistan and now is president emeritus, has been chief of party for several projects around the world with USAID and with NATO, and was an advisor to General Petraeus, who we
Mhm.
had as a speaker in January. So we're a hotshot group at the
And
ICWA.
can you say that date again, please?
Yes, it is going to be Tuesday, March the 10th. Tuesday, March the 10th. Nuclear proliferation. sort of also very significant in the news right now. So you all know you must register. I will tell you that going forward, we have on Wednesday, the 16th or the 18th of March, is an old UN colleague of mine that I worked with, Frank O'Donnell, is going to talk about multilateralism and a changing world order.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a very a fabulous topic. And we have one more, Sean Sheffield. This will be a program for you. Do you want to tell us about it? It's going to be our last program of Great Decisions, March 31st, which is a Tuesday night. Sean, tell us briefly about that program. Oh, we probably can't hear you. You can't talk. Okay. It is going to be on China. And can you put into the chat specifically? It's more than just China. What are the particulars, Janet? What are the particulars that the journal says?
I'll pass on that.
Do you have the journal in front of you?
Well, we have a speaker from Notre Dame.
It's Dr. Mary Gallagher from Notre Dame,
right?
Who is a foremost expert on this. But what is the title of the program specifically?
Well, look it up. U.S.-China relations in the new Trump era.
Ah, okay. Well, it's been quite a year. It's been quite a year for Great Decisions. And we want to thank you very much for coming. And again, thank you to Katherine Ntiamoah and Donna Cassell. You've been fabulous.